His hand hit the wall before she could touch the door handle. Not loud. Not violent. Just, final. The sound of his palm against the hallway wall was quieter than a whisper, but it stopped Isadora cold. The golden light of the dying afternoon poured through the corridor window behind her, warm and gentle, like the world outside had no idea what kind of man was standing inside it. She felt the heat of him at her back before she fully registered what had happened. Her fingers were still curled around the door handle. Her bag was over her shoulder. Her car was waiting downstairs. She had done everything right. And still, Shin Mu-yeol stood between her and the exit like a wall that had decided, quietly and without warning, that it was never going to move again. The contract is over, Isadora said, keeping her voice steady. She was proud of that. Her heart was slamming, but her voice did not shake. We agreed. The gala ends, I go home. Those were your words, Mr. Shin. He didn't respond immediately. That was the thing about Mu-yeol that nobody warned you about. It wasn't the tattoos, though they were impossible to ignore. Dark, deliberate ink crawled up from beneath his crisp white collar, climbing his neck, curling behind his ear, wrapping across the hand now pressed flat against the wall beside her face. Ink that told stories he never spoke out loud. Stories written in pain and power and choices that couldn't be undone. It wasn't even the silence that unnerved you. It was the way he used it. Like a weapon he had sharpened over many, many years. When he finally spoke, his voice came low and even. No anger. No apology. The contract is over, Isadora. But you aren't going anywhere. Shin Mu-yeol was 34 years old and had spent the last decade building an empire that Seoul's elite pretended not to know existed. The Shin Syndicate moved quietly, through real estate holdings, private security contracts, and connections that stretched from the boardrooms of Gangnam to the back rooms that those boardrooms depended on but never acknowledged. He was not the kind of man whose name appeared in newspapers. He was the kind of man newspapers were afraid to print. His advisors had been pressing him for months. You need stability, Mu-yeol SSI. You need a face. The Daesung Group will not finalize a merger with a man whose personal life is a blank wall. Investors want to see a man they can trust. A man with roots. They meant a woman on his arm. Something soft and respectable to balance the rumors. A counterweight to the empire. He had agreed, because Mu-yeol was nothing if not strategic. But he had made one condition perfectly clear: he wanted no part of the performance women his circle produced. The ones who arrived in couture and left with information. The ones who practiced warmth the way other people practiced piano, diligently, technically, and without a single note of feeling. He didn't want a socialite. He wanted someone who wouldn't try to own him by the end of the evening. He had found Isadora entirely by accident. She had been standing in front of a painting at a private gallery in Itaewon, one of the smaller ones, tucked between a coffee shop and a tailor, completely alone, completely unbothered, arguing quietly with herself about whether the brushwork on the left panel was deliberate or a mistake. She hadn't noticed when the room shifted around Mu-yeol's arrival. She hadn't turned to look, the way everyone always turned to look. She had just tilted her head slightly to the right and murmured, to no one in particular, either he knew exactly what he was doing, or he got lucky. Either way, it works. He had stood 2 feet behind her for a full minute before she acknowledged him. When she finally did, she looked at him with calm, intelligent eyes, glanced briefly at the ink on his hands, and said simply, the painting, or me. He had made her an offer before he fully understood why. Isadora Baines was 28. A graduate student. Rent overdue. Her mother's medical bill stacked like a second mortgage on a house that was already mortgaged. She was not reckless, and she was not naive, and she absolutely knew that agreeing to attend a black tie gala on the arm of a man with Syndicate Inc. and a security detail was not the kind of decision that came without risk. But the number he offered was real. The contract he produced was specific. 1 evening. 1 appearance. Professional distance. Payment upon departure. She had signed it with steady hands and told herself it was just theater. She had not planned to be good at it. She certainly had not planned to be this, pressed against his hallway wall in her emerald dress, golden hour spilling across the floor, his tattooed hand flat against the wall beside her face, his dark eyes reading her like she was the only page in a language he'd been trying to learn for years. She had not planned for any of this. And yet, here they were. Now, if you're already feeling the tension in that hallway, if you already need to know what Isadora says next, and whether Mu-yeol is capable of becoming the man she deserves, then welcome to Mafia Moonlight Tales. Hit that like button right now, subscribe so you never miss a chapter, drop a comment telling me who you're already rooting for, and share this with someone who loves a story where power finally meets its match. Because this is only the beginning. And I promise you, neither of them is walking away from this hallway the same person they were when the night started. Let's get into it. The meeting had lasted 40 minutes and accomplished nothing except confirming what Mu-yeol already suspected, that his advisors were afraid of him, and that fear made men useless. They had sat around the long glass table in the Shin Group's 42nd floor conference room, all four of them, in their expensive suits and their careful language, and they had explained, again, that the Daesung Group's board required reassurance. That Director Lim had made quiet inquiries. That the word being passed through certain circles was unstable. That a man of Mu-yeol's profile, without a visible personal anchor, made institutional partners nervous. He had listened. He had not reacted. And when they finished, he had straightened the cuff of his jacket, looked at each of them in turn, and said, "Find me someone. You have 1 week." They had not asked what he meant by someone. They understood. What they brought him over the following 6 days was, without exception, a disaster. A diplomat's daughter who spent the car ride to their introductory dinner dropping the names of everyone she knew, in descending order of usefulness to herself. A professor from Yonsei who arrived with a printed list of what she expected in return for her participation. A former actress who was perfectly warm, perfectly composed, and who, Mu-yeol discovered through a single background query, was currently feeding information to a reporter working a story on syndicate business operations in southern Seoul. He sent them all away. On the 7th day, he went to the gallery alone. Not for any particular reason. He went the way other men poured whiskey at the end of a long week, not because it solved anything, but because it was quiet, and quiet was the only thing that didn't ask something of him. The gallery in Itaewon was small and mostly empty on a Thursday afternoon. He moved through the first 2 rooms without interest, his security detail waiting outside at his instruction, and that was when he heard her. Not loud. Just present. A low, thoughtful sound, almost to herself, the kind of murmuring that happens when someone forgets they're in public because they're too busy actually looking at something. She was standing in front of a mid-sized canvas in the 3rd room. Natural light from the skylight overhead caught the coils of her hair and turned them warm. She was wearing a plain jacket over a simple dress, nothing designed to impress, and she was completely, entirely unbothered by the world behind her. Including him. He stood 2 feet back and watched her study the painting for a full minute. She tilted her head. Changed her angle. Took 1 step closer, then 1 step back. She was not performing contemplation. She was actually doing it. The difference was something Mu-yeol recognized immediately, because he had spent years surrounded by performance and almost nothing else. When she finally spoke, she didn't turn around. The painting, or me? He paused. The painting. For now. She glanced at him then. A brief, unhurried assessment, his face, his collar, the ink at his throat, and she returned to the canvas without alarm. It's the brushwork on the left side. I can't decide if he knew what he was doing or just got lucky. Does it matter? It does to me. Her name, he learned afterward, was Isadora Baines. His team had it within the hour. The rest came quickly, 28, graduate student, no criminal record, no syndicate affiliations, no agenda visible from any angle they looked. Her mother was ill. The bills were significant. The house they owned in Mapogu was 30 days from a creditor's notice. He didn't feel good about that detail. But he didn't look away from it either. He called her the following morning and made her an offer so precise, so clean, so deliberately hard to refuse, that she went quiet for a long moment before she answered. One night, she said finally. That's all. One night, he agreed. He had believed it when he said it. That was the part he would think about later, that in that moment, he had genuinely believed it himself. He had done this before. Not often, but enough. A stylist brought in, a selection of gowns arranged by color and formality, a woman positioned in the center of his penthouse's dressing suite while assistants moved around her like choreographed satellites. It was a practical exercise. A costume for a role. He had always treated it that way, and the women before had always understood. They were being dressed for his world, fitted into a shape his world required, and they were grateful for it. He expected Isadora to be grateful too. He had not expected her to be late. She arrived 11 minutes past the agreed time, slightly out of breath, her bag on one shoulder, a half-eaten pastry wrapped in paper in her other hand, and she looked around his penthouse the way a person looks at a museum, impressed, but not undone by it. Her eyes moved across the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city line of Gangnam suspended beyond the glass like a painting someone had paid too much for, and she said, almost to herself, well, that's a view. Then she noticed the racks. 3 of them. Gowns in silk, chiffon, and structured satin, arranged by his stylist, Jisoo, who had dressed more than one woman for more than one occasion in this penthouse and who had the professional composure to show absolutely nothing on her face. Isadora looked at the racks, then at Mu-yeol, who was standing by the window with his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, ink and all. All of these are for tonight. The selection is standard. Standard, she repeated quietly, in a tone that was not quite agreement. Jisoo guided her efficiently through the options. Isadora was not difficult, she didn't complain, didn't demand, didn't perform excitement for his benefit. She simply moved through the choices with the same quiet attention she had given the painting in the gallery, touching fabric briefly, asking 1 or 2 practical questions about movement and sleeve length. She turned down a floor-length ivory gown that Jisoo had recommended first. Turned down a deep burgundy with structured shoulders. Paused at a sleeveless emerald piece, simple in cut, precise in construction, the kind of dress that made no apologies, and said, this one. Jisoo looked at Mu-yeol. He gave a single nod. He should have left the room. That was what he normally did, made the decision, delegated the details, returned when the result was ready. He had no reason to stay. He stayed. He told himself it was a matter of timeline. The gala began at 8. It was already past 5. He remained by the window with his phone in his hand, monitoring the evening's logistics, keeping his eyes on the screen. He was not particularly successful at this. When Isadora stepped out from behind the screen in the emerald dress, the room didn't change. The light didn't shift. Jisoo made a quiet sound of approval and moved to adjust the shoulder seam with practiced hands. It was a perfectly ordinary moment in a perfectly ordinary preparation. And yet Mu-yeol's hand stopped moving over his phone screen. The dress was good. Jisoo had good taste, that was why he kept her. But it wasn't the dress. It was the fact that the dress was almost irrelevant, that the woman wearing it carried herself with a stillness that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with who she simply, fundamentally was. Shoulders back. Chin level. Not performing composure. Just having it. He had put women in designer gowns before and watched them become something. Isadora had walked in off the street in a jacket and a half-eaten pastry and she had already been something. The dress had merely confirmed it. Jisoo caught his expression and said nothing. She was very good at her job. Isadora met his eyes in the mirror across the room. Will it work? Mu-yeol looked back at his phone. It'll do. It was the most dishonest thing he had said all week. He gave her an hour before the car arrived. That was deliberate. Enough time to go over the necessary details, names, relationships, the precise social geography of the people they would encounter at the gala, without making the briefing feel like a rehearsal. Mu-yeol had done this kind of preparation before, for other things. He was good at it. Efficient. He knew how to move people toward a required outcome without them feeling moved. He poured 2 glasses of water, set a thin folder on the kitchen island, and waited for Isadora to sit. She sat, folded her hands on the counter, and looked at him with patient, attentive eyes. He began. Director Lim of the Daesung Group would be the most important person in the room. Older, traditional, deeply conservative in his values, the kind of man who decided whether to trust someone within the first 2 minutes of meeting them and never revised that decision. His wife attended every function and watched the women on their partners' arms more carefully than her husband watched the men. Mu-yeol needed to register as settled. Grounded. Not a transaction. When Director Lim speaks to you, Mu-yeol said, listen more than you respond. Compliment his wife's taste, she'll be wearing something traditional, she always does. Don't ask about business. Don't offer opinions on anything political. If the conversation moves somewhere uncomfortable, look at me. I'll redirect it. Isadora nodded slowly. When we enter the room, stay close to my left side. Not behind me, beside me. Eye contact when you're being introduced. Smile, but not immediately. A smile that arrives too fast looks practiced. And one that arrives too slow looks nervous. There's a window. A very small window, she observed. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the folder, glanced through the first page of names and brief biographical notes he had prepared, and closed it again. Can I ask you something? He gestured for her to continue. This script you've written, she said, carefully, the listening, the complimenting, the precise smile, is this how you actually are with people? Or is this a performance you've decided I should give? Mu-yeol looked at her. It's strategy. It's boring, she said simply. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Boring, he repeated. Director Lim is traditional, you said. Traditional people can read a performance. They've seen enough of them. She turned the glass of water slowly between her palms. If I walk in there hitting every mark on your list, smiling in that specific window, never saying anything that hasn't been pre-approved, he'll know. His wife will definitely know. People like that have spent their whole lives watching other people pretend. Mu-yeol said nothing. He was listening, which was not something he did often in conversations he had expected to be leading. What if, Isadora continued, you just let me be a person? I'll be your person, for the evening. But a real one. I'll listen to Director Lim because I'm actually interested in people, not because you told me to. I'll compliment his wife if I genuinely notice something worth complimenting. She paused. Authenticity is harder to dismiss than technique. You know that. You run an empire, you've seen what happens when people sense they're being handled. He studied her for a long moment. She did not fidget under it. That, more than anything she had said, was what moved something behind his eyes. He had sat across from politicians, rivals, men who had been trained to hold a gaze as a dominance tactic. Isadora held his simply because she had nothing to hide. He reached over and slid the folder off the counter. Don't embarrass me, he said. The smallest smile crossed her face. I never do. He almost believed her immediately. That was what unsettled him most, how quickly, and how completely, he almost believed her. The Daesung Group's annual gala occupied the entire top floor of a hotel in Gangnam that had been designed specifically to make people feel the precise weight of their own ambitions. The ceilings were high. The lighting was golden and merciless. Every surface reflected something back at you, and the trick was to look comfortable with what you saw. Mu-yeol had been comfortable in rooms like this for years. Not because they were natural to him, nothing about chandelier light and waiters with rehearsed smiles was natural to him, but because discomfort was information, and he had long ago learned to use information rather than show it. He felt Isadora beside him as they stepped through the entrance, and he understood, without looking directly at her, that she was doing the same thing. She had been quiet in the car. Not tense, quiet in the way she was quiet in the gallery, in the way she was quiet when she was paying attention to something. He had watched the city move past the window on his side and said nothing, and she had let the silence exist without trying to fill it, which was its own kind of remarkable. Now, in the light of the gala, he finally looked at her. The emerald dress caught the gold of the room and gave it back differently, deeper, more grounded. Her hair was gathered back at one side, the curls loose enough to feel uncontrived. She was not scanning the room the way people scan rooms at events like this, cataloging status and calculating approach angles. She was simply present. Her chin was level. Her expression was open without being eager. Director Lim found them within the first 15 minutes. He was a broad man with a careful handshake and eyes that did exactly what Mu-yeol had described, settled on a person and measured them without apology. His wife, Jong-suk, arrived a half-step behind him in a beautifully embroidered hanbok the color of pale gold, and her eyes moved to Isadora immediately. Isadora met the look with a warmth that was entirely unscripted. Your embroidery, she said to Jong-suk, before Mu-yeol had finished the introduction. The chrysanthemum pattern on the sleeve, is that hand-stitched? Jong-suk blinked, then looked down at her own arm as though surprised to be seen so specifically. It is my mother's work. Most people don't notice. It's extraordinary, Isadora said. And she meant it. Mu-yeol could hear the difference. So could Jong-suk. The conversation that followed was not on any list Mu-yeol had prepared. It moved through needlework and memory and the particular patience required for things built slowly, and Director Lim watched his wife's face relax by degrees, and somewhere in that unwinding, his assessment of Mu-yeol quietly shifted. Mu-yeol said very little. He didn't need to. Isadora had walked into the room and simply been a person, exactly as she'd said she would, and it was more effective than any strategy he had mapped. The trouble arrived an hour later, in the form of Chairman Bae. He was a rival of long-standing, Mu-yeol's, and before Mu-yeol, his predecessors. He moved through the room with the particular confidence of a man who believed that what he knew about you was more dangerous than anything you could do to him. He approached their small circle with a smile that was constructed entirely from the outside in. Shin Mu-yeol. He extended his hand. And who is this? You've been hiding someone. The introduction was made. Bae's eyes moved over Isadora with open appraisal, then returned to Mu-yeol. Brave woman, he said lightly, lifting his glass. Getting close to a man with your particular history. I imagine she's heard the stories. He smiled at Isadora directly. The things this man has done to people who disappointed him. It was a small cruelty, delivered with the precision of someone who had practiced it. The kind of comment designed to land softly enough to deny and hard enough to wound. The room didn't hear it. But Isadora did. Mu-yeol felt it before he saw it, a slight shift in weight beside him, and then her hand found his. Not frantically. Not performatively. Just, deliberately. Her fingers closed around his tattooed ones with the quiet certainty of someone who had decided something and was not going to be talked out of it. She looked at Chairman Bae with an expression that was perfectly pleasant and completely unmoved. I've heard enough, she said simply. About the right things. Bae held her gaze for a moment, found nothing useful in it, and excused himself shortly after. Mu-yeol did not move his hand. Neither did she. The warmth of her grip stayed against his palm long after Bae had dissolved back into the crowd, and Mu-yeol stood very still inside it, understanding, with a clarity that arrived uninvited and refused to leave, that no one had stood beside him like that before. Not once. Not ever. Not without being paid specifically to do so. And the contract, he realized, had not covered this. It looks like you've sent the Chapter 5 outline again, which we've already written. I think you meant to send Chapter 6 outline. Here it is, written and ready for you. The clock on the ballroom wall read 11:47 when Mu-yeol's phone vibrated twice in his breast pocket. His chief of staff. A single message, Lim's legal team confirmed. Documents ready for Monday. Consider tonight a success. He slipped the phone away and said nothing to Isadora, who was beside him again in the ballroom, a glass of sparkling water in her hand, watching a small string quartet arrange themselves near the far wall with the same quiet attention she gave everything. She had put her shoes back on. The terrace was behind them, sealed behind glass, and the unscripted hour they had shared out there existed now in that particular way that certain moments exist, real, but already beginning to feel fragile, like something that might not survive being spoken about directly. The merger was secure. The evening had served its purpose. Mu-yeol understood, with the practiced clarity of a man who built his life on knowing exactly where things stood, that the contract was nearly complete. He did not reach for his phone again. At midnight, Isadora turned to him. She had read the room the way she read everything, carefully, without announcing it. The Limps left 20 minutes ago, she said. Bae left before that. I think we've done what we came to do. We have. She nodded, and something in her expression settled into a kind of quiet resolution. She had been prepared for this moment, he realized. She had kept it in view the entire evening, even on the terrace, even in the conversation that had moved somewhere neither of them had planned. She had never lost sight of the exit. That was the difference between them. Then I'll get my things, she said. His assistant had her coat and her bag at the cloakroom within minutes. Efficient. Mu-yeol watched it happen from across the room, watched her thank the attendant by name, having learned it earlier in the evening without any particular reason except that she learned people's names, watched her settle the coat over the emerald dress, watched the gala close over the space she left behind like water over a stone. He met her near the entrance. His car was already waiting, he'd had it arranged, another habit, always knowing where the exits were and what was waiting beyond them. In the elevator down, she counted the floors quietly on the panel display. He watched the numbers without seeing them. The lobby delivered them to the car in the smooth, thoughtless way that expensive evenings always ended, and they rode the first several minutes in a silence that was different from the terrace. That silence had been full. This one had an edge to it, the particular tension of a thing winding down that isn't entirely sure it wants to. "You were right," he said finally. "About the script." She glanced at him. "Jong-suk mentioned you to her husband 3 times during the dinner portion." "I counted. Whatever you said to her about the embroidery, that mattered more than the entire briefing I prepared. I told you authenticity was harder to dismiss than technique. You did." She looked out the window. The streets of Gangnam moved past in streaks of gold and white. "I meant what I said to Bae, as well. I want you to know that. It wasn't part of the performance." He did know. That was the problem. The car stopped outside her building, modest, mid-city, the kind of building that existed to house people with somewhere better to be eventually. She reached for her bag. Straightened her coat. Turned to him with a professional composure that cost her something, though she didn't let it show. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Shin. I'll look for the transfer in the morning." She reached for the door handle. And then, without plan, without strategy, without a single calculation behind it, Mu-yeol understood that he had not prepared for this moment at all. Her fingers were on the door handle. That was the detail that stayed with him afterward, not the golden light of the corridor, not the way the emerald dress caught it, not even the scent of her perfume thinning slowly into the night air as the gala receded behind them. Just her hand on the handle. The simple, decided motion of a woman who had completed what she came to do and was ready to return to her life. His palm hit the wall before he understood that he had moved. Not loud. Not violent. Just, final. The sound of it stopped her completely. Her shoulders stilled. Her hand remained on the handle but no longer pressed it. The corridor stretched behind them, quiet and golden, the hotel's careful lighting making something warm out of a moment that was anything but simple. Mu-yeol stood close enough that he could see the small pearl earring at her jaw. Close enough that she would be able to feel the heat of him before she fully registered the reality of what had just happened. She didn't turn around immediately. He gave her credit for that. When she did turn, slowly, her back finding the door, her eyes came up to his with an expression that was not fear. He knew fear, had seen it on stronger people in worse situations. It was something more composed than that. A wariness. A waiting. "What are you doing?" she said. "There's been a credible threat reported this evening." His voice was even. "Against several parties connected to the Daesung merger. My security team has flagged it. Protocol requires that anyone in close proximity to my operations be moved to a secure location until it's assessed." Isadora looked at him. He held the look. She said, very quietly, "That isn't true." He said nothing. Mu-yeol. She used his name without the formal address, and the casualness of it, deliberate, he understood, a small precision, landed with more weight than she probably intended. "I know what a lie sounds like when it's being managed. You gave me that one too smoothly. You'd already prepared it." He lowered his arm but didn't step back. The door remained behind her. The corridor remained empty around them. The city beyond the window at the far end was doing what cities do, continuing without interest in the two people standing in its ambient light. "You're trying to find a reason," she said. "That's what this is. The threat assessment is standard. Stop. Not angry. Just clear." The same voice she had used to close down Chairman Bae, pleasant on the surface, immovable underneath. "I'm not one of the people you manage, and I won't be handled like one. If you have something to say, say it plainly. You've done it before. On the terrace, you were plain." The terrace. His mother's handwriting on his wrist. The city below them, and her standing close without being asked. He exhaled once. Looked at the floor briefly, which was not something he did. "It's late," he said finally. The roads are. Mu-yeol. His name again. Quiet. Leveling. He stopped. She watched him in the golden corridor light, and her expression held something he hadn't seen directed at him in longer than he could accurately measure, not pity, not calculation, not the careful warmth of someone managing an impression. Just a person, seeing him. Waiting to see if he would let himself be seen. I'm not going to disappear, she said, softer now. You have my number. The contract may be over, but the world hasn't ended. He said nothing. But he didn't move away from the door either. She looked at his hand, still raised against the wall beside her, the ink across his knuckles catching the corridor light, and then back up at his face. You just want me near you, she said. Simply. Without cruelty or triumph. Just the plain truth of it, laid out carefully between them like something she was choosing not to step over. Mu-yeol's jaw tightened. You aren't going anywhere, he said quietly. Tonight. She held his gaze for a long moment. And then, not because she was afraid, not because he had given her a reason, but because something on the terrace had already shifted the ground beneath the agreement they had both signed, she let go of the door handle. One night, she said. He almost smiled. He didn't. But it was close. The guest room was larger than her entire apartment. She didn't say that out loud, but she thought it standing in the doorway while Mu-yeol's housekeeper, a quiet, efficient woman named Mrs. Park who had appeared from somewhere in the penthouse's interior without being summoned, set fresh towels on the bed with the practiced calm of someone accustomed to unusual arrangements at unusual hours. Everything in the room was considered. The bedding was the kind of heavy, cool linen that made ordinary sleep feel like a different category of experience. The window looked out over Gangnam from the 44th floor, the city grid brilliant and geometric far below. There was a robe on the back of the bathroom door, still tagged, in exactly her size. That last detail was the one that stayed with her. Mrs. Park left without questions. Isadora set her bag on the chair by the window and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room around her, the clean surfaces, the deliberate comfort, the view that cost more per square foot than she could meaningfully calculate, and understood, with a quietness that was almost like calm, that Shin Mu-yeol had been prepared for this. Not for her specifically, perhaps. But for this. For the possibility that someone would stay. For the need to make staying feel so frictionless that leaving would require a conscious, effortful decision. She slept anyway, because she was tired and because refusing the bed on principle would have helped no one. In the morning she found him in the kitchen. Not in a suit. That was the first difference. He was in dark trousers and a plain black shirt with the sleeves pushed up, the tattoos fully visible in the daylight that poured through the kitchen windows. He was reading something on a tablet and drinking coffee, and he looked, for approximately 4 seconds, before he registered her presence, like a man who was somewhere close to ordinary. Then he looked up and the 4 seconds ended. Mrs. Park can make you anything, he said. Tell her what you want. I can make my own breakfast. I'm aware that you can. I'm telling you there's another option. Isadora poured herself coffee from the pot on the counter, leaned against the opposite side of the kitchen island, and looked at him steadily. Outside, Seoul moved through its morning without them. I want to go home today, she said. He turned a page on his tablet. There are still aspects of the security situation being assessed. You and I both know there is no security situation. He said nothing. Which was, she had learned, its own kind of answer. She set her cup down. Mu-yeol. Look at me. He did. Slowly, with the deliberate quality of a man who controlled the pace of everything he participated in, he set the tablet down and looked at her. I understand what this is, she said. I'm not confused about it. You're not ready for last night to be over, and you don't know what to do with that, so you're doing the only thing you know how to do, you're controlling the situation. You're keeping the variable close. Something moved behind his eyes. But I'm not a variable, she continued. And this, she gestured at the penthouse, the room, the robe that had been in her size, all of this is extraordinary. And it means nothing if it's a cage. Even a beautiful one. She paused. You can keep me here, Mu-yeol. I'm not naive enough to think I have a simple exit from a man like you. But you cannot make me love you. Not like this. Not through control. The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched something move through his expression that she didn't have a name for yet, something that was neither the boardroom stillness nor the terrace honesty, but somewhere between the two. A new country. Unmapped. I know that, he said finally. She picked her coffee back up. Then what are you going to do about it? He looked at the window. At the city below, the one he owned pieces of, the one that had never once asked him how he was. He didn't answer immediately. But he reached over and refilled her cup without being asked, and somehow that said more than anything prepared language could have managed. She let it. For now, she let it. But her bag stayed packed by the chair. And they both noticed that too. The threat arrived on a Tuesday. Isadora had been in the penthouse for 3 days by then. Not comfortably, she had made that clear, repeatedly, in the particular way she made everything clear, which was without drama and without softening. She had established boundaries the way she did most things, plainly, and without asking permission. She used the kitchen. She worked at the dining table on her graduate research in the mornings. She did not join him for dinner unless she chose to, and twice she had not chosen to. Mu-yeol had said nothing about any of it. He had simply adjusted around her presence the way water adjusts around a new stone, quietly, and completely, and in ways he was only partially aware of. He was in his study when Dae-sung came in without knocking, which he only ever did when the information couldn't wait for courtesy. Yun Syndicate, Dae-sung said. They've been watching the building since Sunday. 3 vehicles. Rotating positions. He set a tablet on the desk with photographs, timestamps, license plates, faces. It's not surveillance. They're waiting for a window. Mu-yeol looked at the photographs without touching the tablet. What changed? The Dae-sung merger. The Yun Syndicate had a competing interest. Director Lim choosing you closed a door they'd spent 18 months building. Dae-sung paused. They know about the woman. The room shifted, almost imperceptibly. They've been running her name since Saturday, Dae-sung continued carefully. Her address. Her mother's location. They're building leverage. Mu-yeol stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't overturn the desk or make the kind of noise that lesser men made when fear arrived wearing anger's clothing. He stood, and he was very still, and Dae-sung took a measured step backward because he had worked for Mu-yeol for 11 years and he knew that the stillness was the most serious version of him. Move her mother tonight, Mu-yeol said. Private medical facility, full security, all costs covered, no questions asked. Don't tell Isadora until it's done. He picked up the tablet. And get me Yun's direct line. Boss. Dae-sung hesitated. If you contact Yun directly, you're confirming she matters to you. That makes her more valuable to them as a target, not less. The strategic move is to distance yourself from. Get me the line. Dae-sung left. Mu-yeol stood at the window of his study and looked at Gangnam below, and for the first time in a long time he felt the specific weight of a choice that had no clean side. Distancing himself from Isadora was the rational calculation, remove the leverage, neutralize the threat, return to the cold geometry of risk management that had kept him alive and operational for a decade. He couldn't do it. The realization arrived without ceremony. He couldn't move her out of his life to protect his position, because his position had stopped being the thing he was most concerned with protecting, and he didn't know exactly when that had happened but it had, and standing at the window trying to locate the precise moment felt less important than what he was going to do about it. He went to find her. She was at the dining table, exactly where she was every morning, her research notes spread around her laptop in the organized chaos she maintained. She looked up when he came in, read his face with the efficiency she read everything, and closed the laptop. He told her plainly. All of it. The surveillance, her mother, the call he was about to make that would draw Yun's attention fully and deliberately onto him and away from her. The risk that represented. The choice he was making and why. She was quiet for a long time when he finished. You're going to expose yourself, she said. To protect me. And your mother. Yes. Mu-yeol, she stopped. Started again. Your security team thinks it's the wrong move. Strategically. It is. Then why? He looked at her across the table, the research notes, the coffee cup, the ordinary architecture of a life she had built entirely by herself, with no empire behind her and no syndicate at her back, just her own considerable, undefeated self, and he said the truest thing he had said since his mother's handwriting on his wrist. Because I would rather absorb every consequence of loving you than protect a single interest by letting something happen to you. The word landed between them. Neither of them had used it before. It sat in the room now, solid and irreversible, like something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for someone to say it out loud. Isadora looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood, crossed the distance between them, and took his face in her hands the way you hold something you have decided to keep, carefully, completely, without reservation. Then you'd better come back, she said. He covered her hands with his. The ink on his knuckles dark against her skin. I always do, he said. And for the first time in the entire story of Shin Mu-yeol, that promise was made for someone else's sake entirely. He came back. 3 days after the call to Yun's direct line, 3 days of negotiations that Mu-yeol conducted with the cold precision of a man who had learned long ago how to make danger recognize him as something more costly than the alternative. The vehicles outside disappeared. The rotating positions dissolved. The threat, redirected entirely onto him and absorbed entirely by him, collapsed under the weight of a counteroffer that left the Yun Syndicate with enough to save face and nothing else. He came back, and he was unhurt, and Isadora was waiting in the kitchen when he walked through the door. She didn't run to him. She looked up from the counter, read him the way she always read him, top to bottom, efficiently, missing nothing, and then she put the kettle on and said, "Sit down." He sat. She made tea. She set it in front of him and sat across from him, and they stayed like that for a while, in the particular silence of two people who have moved through something together and arrived somewhere neither of them had originally planned to be. "My mother called me this morning," she said eventually. "From the facility. She said the room has a garden view." She turned her cup slowly. She said someone had left her favorite flowers on the table. Bird of paradise. She doesn't know many people in Seoul who would know that. Mu-yeol said nothing. "You asked Dae-sung to find out," Isadora said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She nodded slowly. Outside, the city moved through its morning. The penthouse held them both in its high, quiet light, and Isadora looked at the men across from her, the tattoos, the stillness, the empire folded into a plain black shirt, and she thought about the contract they had signed, which had been so precise and so clean and so entirely insufficient for the thing it had accidentally set in motion. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what this has been. What it started as." He waited. "You hired me to be something for your world. A performance. A variable you could control." She was careful with it, not unkind. "And I agreed, because I needed what you were offering, and I told myself it was just theater." She paused. "But theater ends when the audience leaves. And somehow neither of us left." He looked at her steadily. "What I know," she continued, "is that I cannot be owned. Not by a contract, not by a penthouse, not by a man who decides, however genuinely, that he needs me near him. I know that about myself." She met his eyes fully. "And what I've learned about you is that the version of you that is worthy of something real is not the one who stopped me at the door with his hand on the wall. It's the one on the terrace who told me about his mother's handwriting. It's the one who absorbed a syndicate's threat rather than use me as expendable distance. That man I could choose freely." She let that word settle between them. "Freely. Not because I'm kept here. Because I decide to stay." Mu-yeol was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "I don't know how to do this without trying to control the outcome." "I know," she said. "That's the work." He looked at his hands on the table. The ink. His mother's words curling at his wrist, the water finding its way home, regardless of the shape of the land. "Then I'll do the work," he said. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Not the urgent, protective grip of the gala. Something quieter. More permanent. Because this is what the story of Shin Mu-yeol ultimately became, not a story about a man powerful enough to stop a woman from leaving, but about a man who finally became worthy of her choosing to stay. Power without vulnerability is a prison with excellent lighting. Control without trust is a contract with no signatures that matter. And love, real love, the kind that reshapes a person from the inside, cannot be purchased, cannot be managed, cannot be kept behind a door. It can only be earned. Slowly. Honestly. One unscripted moment at a time. He turned his hand over beneath hers. And held on, not to keep her, but because she was still there. That, for Shin Mu-yeol, was everything.